Welcome to Golden Recaps. In today's video, we'll be going through the 2012 action thriller film, Jack Reacher. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, and press the bell icon so we'll bring you more interesting recaps like these. The movie begins and in the opening scene, a man drives out to an empty building. He surveys a park not too far from his position and soon he starts shooting at several targets who appear to be random, killing most. Later, a couple of armed policemen storm the building in search of the shooter. Emerson, the detective lead on the case, goes through the crime scene. He finds a bullet and a quarter at the scene. They run an analysis of the evidence and the fingerprint of a man named James Barr comes up. Barr is found in his home and arrested with compelling evidence, linking him to the shooter, found in his home. Barr is interrogated at the station by Emerson and the DA, Roldan. Emerson commences by threatening Barr that he's likely going to face the death penalty, which the DA prefers, but he wishes to see Barr live a long life in prison. Emerson then tells Barr Roldan feels generous today and is willing to let him take a pic if he confesses to the murder of the victims at the park and waives his right to counsel, saving himself and the city a costly trial. Barr takes the paper to sign the deal. Roldan celebrates their quick victory, but they are shocked when Barr inscribes on the paper the words, "Get Jack Reacher." The police immediately begin digging, finding clues as to who Jack Reacher might be. They could only find clues of who he was before he disappeared. Emerson briefs Roldan that Reacher was born and raised in the military on bases abroad. Reacher was a distinct military personnel who served the U.S. military in several countries, earning multiple medals and attaining the status of major. Reacher also spent the bulk of his service as a police in the military. While they keep talking, Reacher walks into Roldan's office. Reacher is taken to see Barr. Roldan asks Reacher why he was mentioned as a witness by Barr. Reacher, doubtful, asks for proof, which Roldan refuses. Reacher leaves abruptly. While they try to stop him from leaving, Barr's attorney, Helen, shows up. She's upset that Roldan and Emerson might have been speaking to her client without her presence. Reacher is surprised. She's Barr's attorney, and Emerson introduces her as Helen Roldan, the district attorney's daughter, which makes him even more surprised. Reacher inquires if it's even legal for Helen to go up against her father in court, to which she replies fortunately it is. While Helen tries to depose Reacher, stating that he's her only defense witness, thinking Reacher is friends with Barr. He clarifies that he and Barr aren't friends and in fact, the only reason he's here is to bury Barr. Helen interviews Reacher further over coffee. She tells Reacher that her father has never lost a capital case because he never picks a fight he can't win. Every murder suspect is given one of two options, either to confess or face the death penalty, against a DA that never loses. Helen strongly believes that more than one innocent man has been put down without a fight. Reacher responds she's fighting on the wrong side this time, as he has no doubts that Barr is guilty. Reacher then tells Helen a little history about Barr. He tells her Barr joined the military because he was the kind of man who wanted a legal means of killing. Barr made sniper and he trained hard, firing about 2,000 rounds each week. Barr had been taught to visualize the base of a man's skull with every shot. Finally, he gets deployed to Iraq and for 2 long years, he is kept on overwatch, never once firing a single shot. The war ends, and Barr finds himself unable to scratch the itch of not for once firing at a human target. The day before he leaves, he takes his gun and kills 4 civilian contractors who had been hired by the military. Although he covered his tracks well, he got caught by Reacher and confessed. Helen asks why he wasn't in prison then. Reacher explains that the 4 men had just recently been on a rape rally of 28 women, and someone within the cooperation wanted everything swept under the rug. Helen deduces that he was about to hand all this information to the DA. Reacher tells her that the last time he saw Barr, he made him a promise which he came over to keep, but realized he doesn't need to, after seeing him in the condition he was. Helen tells Reacher that Barr might get away this time also, as he was injured in state custody, and she's going to declare him unfit to stand trial. Helen asks Reacher to be her lead investigator and look through the evidence objectively. Reacher agrees, but on the condition that she also looks into the victims objectively. Helen visits Mr. Fourier, the father of one of the victims. She tells him she's hoping to get a better sense of the victims. He asks if she's spoken with the other families, and she confirms that she has spoken to those who would speak to her. Then he lets her in. Meanwhile, Reacher is at the crime scene and after some observations, he notices something quite unusual. But what does he notice? We'll find out in a bit. Mr. Fourier hands Helen an article telling her everything she wishes to know about his daughter is in there. Helen becomes scared after seeing a gun on the table and tries to leave. He stops her, asking why she would defend a man who took everything from him. Helen, realizing she's made a mistake coming to his house, apologizes and leaves immediately. While she's about to drive away, she's accosted unexpectedly by her father. He asks if it's true she's been talking to the victims' families by herself. She asks him how he knew and how he found her. He replies that she isn't the only one with the right investigators and warns that Reacher can't be trusted, as she knows very little about him. Roldan pleads with his daughter not to make a terrible mistake by choosing to fight him on this case, as she might ruin her career all in a bid to hurt him. This vexes Helen, and she leaves abruptly. Reacher also takes a look at the evidence gathered by the police at the station. Emerson assures him he's free to come back to take a look anytime he wants. Reacher responds that he doesn't need a second look. Emerson, shocked, states that he didn't take any notes. Reacher also responds that he doesn't need to. Emerson asks Reacher about his job as a cop in the army. Reacher replies that it's pretty much the same as his, except every suspect was a trained killer. Before leaving, Reacher ponders over why Barr might have paid for packing, considering that he was about to kill 6 people, but was worried about the meter maid. Emerson answers that it might have been out of habit and muscle memory, and probably didn't know he was doing it. Emerson asks what the serial number was on the rifle, and Reacher responds by asking what the date on the quarter was. After telling Emerson it was 1968, he leaves. Reacher then walks into a crowded bar, and he's soon approached by a young lady. She tells him her name is Sandy. He tells her he was also Sandy, last week, on a beach in Florida. She asks for his name, and he tells her
Jimmy Reese.
Not expecting that, she tells him he doesn't look like a Jimmy. After a little cheat-chat, she asks if he wishes to leave the bar for a more quiet place like her car. Reacher asks her if she's old enough to drive, and she tells him she's old enough to do a lot of things. Reacher tells her he won't be able to afford her. Sandy, shocked, immediately claims that she's not a hooker, and she works at the auto parts store. Reacher explains to her that the cheapest women always tend to be the ones you pay for. This vexes Sandy, and she stands up annoyed, yelling that she isn't a hooker. This attracts the attention of a gang of young men who in turn claim Sandy is their sister. Sandy claims that she was called a whore by Reacher. Reacher explains that nobody said whore, telling them she inferred the word hooker, but he meant slut. The leader of the gang asks Reacher to step outside, as he was going to beat his ass, and it would be his choice if that were to happen in the bar or outside. Reacher agrees to step out. When they all walk outside, Reacher warns that this is their final chance to walk away, but they ignore his warning, stating that he's outnumbered. A fight ensues, and Reacher takes out the leader with a few moves, before fending off the rest of the gang. Soon the police arrive, and they run away, leaving Reacher, who's asked to go to the ground. Reacher now realizes he has been set up. Reacher is arrested, and Helen comes to the station with Emerson to bail him out. Emerson tells Reacher he's starting to understand why he moves around a lot. He leaves and Helen scolds Reacher. Helen tells him that whatever he does while working as her investigator is a reflection of her and her firm. Reacher apologizes and explains that a girl came onto him and picked a fight. He tells Helen that the girl knew who he was, and the cops rolled in before the fight even started with her brothers, making him believe someone had set the whole thing up. He asks Helen about her day, and she tells him it went exactly the way she thinks he hoped it would. Then he asks her what she's learned. Helen gives Reacher the details of each of the victims, starting with Chrissy Ferrier, who was 22 and a nanny, caring for the 6-year-old daughter of family friends. She had planned on leaving for China the week before, but the 6-year-old girl she cared for wanted Chrissy to stay for her 7th birthday, and both were en route to pick out a dress that day. Rita Coronado was a cleaning lady at a plaza who had a 9-year-old son she dropped off at school each day before work. Rita was on her way to pick up tickets for her son's first baseball game that day. Nancy Holt had told her husband she was taking her car to be serviced that day, but instead she was headed downtown. Line Archer was on her way to secure a loan to save her late husband's construction business she had always hated, because she could not bring herself to sell the company. Darren Sawyer was an investment broker in the same building Rita worked. His wife said they'd grown increasingly distant, and their last words to each other weren't kind. His body was found next to a bouquet of roses he bought on his way to work. Reacher tells Helen that about 2.5 million Americans die every year, and 5 of them dying on the same spot on a single day doesn't seem quite random to him.
I'm sorry, could you please put a shirt on?
This is my shirt.
Reacher comes up with a claim that Darren and Nancy might have been in an affair, and that is probably why Nancy kept walking whilst everyone ran. Helen asks what his point was, and he tells her that 2 of the victims might have not been there by chance. Reacher asks Helen to help him get Barr's credit card statement, as he would require a list of all the places he hung out. Helen asks what he was hoping to find, but he tells her he needs some sleep. He picks up her keys and gives them to her, then he tells her to come pick him up the next morning at 7. Later that night, a man who had been following Reacher drives to meet Charlie and the Zek. He gives them information on Helen and Reacher. He tells them he suspects Reacher might know something, so he took steps, but it ended up blowing back on him. Charlie grows upset, telling him he was out of place making such decisions, as they have a process of doing things that they stay done. The Zek comes out of the shadows and the man is terrified. He pleads for an opportunity to fix his mistakes. The Zek tells him that he has no chance of fixing anything, but he would have use of him if he could show he was rare and willing to do anything to survive. He's asked to chop off his fingers with his teeth. Unable to meet the Zek's demand, he gets shot in the head. The next morning, Helen gives Reacher Barr's credit card statement and witness testimonies. She tells him Barr's CC statement was a dead end as all he bought was gas and groceries. Reacher asks her to help him find gun ranges of 100 miles to 150 miles from their location. Helen wants to know why, and Reacher points out that Barr consistently filled his tank and took long drives on the weekends. Reacher asks Helen to drop him off at the auto parts store, which she does. He walks into the store, sees Gary the store manager, and requests to see Sandy. Gary asks to see some ID, and Reacher tells him he would be seeing the inside of an ambulance instead if he tries to stop him. Now speaking with Sandy, Reacher asks where he could find Jeb. After giving Reacher his address, she asks if she's in trouble. Reacher shakes his head and asks for her car keys. Before he leaves, she tells him that she gets off work by 6. Reacher advises that she seems sweet, pretty, and smart. He tells her she doesn't have to let herself be used by the guys she finds herself with. She replies that it's just what girls like herself do. Reacher also advises her to leave town. Then he goes to Jeb's house. He meets an old lady at the door who says nothing to him. Then he enters, and searches the house. While still in Jeb's house, Reacher is attacked by 2 men who are very enthusiastic to get their hands on him. Although caught in a tight position, he manages to fend off the men and finally put them down. Then a third guy, Punk, walks up behind him pointing a gun at his head. Reacher defends himself by seizing the gun. He asks Punk for the whereabouts of Jeb, and he replies that the last they spoke Jeb had told him he was going to meet up with a guy. Reacher takes his keys and leaves. Reacher goes to Helen's office. In there he informs her that Jeb, the guy from the bar, is dead. Helen asked Reacher how hard he hit him, and he explains that he wasn't the cause. Jeb was murdered and someone tried to make it look as though he left town. Reacher then tells Helen that 99% of the evidence her dad has did not exist in Baghdad, not because Barr was smart, but because he was trained. Reacher explains that from the garage, the shooter had the sun in his eyes, with targets moving left and right, making it difficult conditions for any sniper. Reacher assumes that with the training Barr had, Barr would have taken the shots instead from the bridge, which would have given him more ideal conditions. Helen asks what Reacher was getting at, and he tells her he believes Barr is innocent, as Barr was incapable of firing 6 perfect shots in such poor conditions. Helen accuses Reacher of stringing up theories, as she believes he doesn't want this case closed, as it might be his last. She tells him her father was right, and how it all makes sense now. Reacher then shows her the car which has been following him all day. He gives her the tag number, asking her to run a search on it. At the same time, the Zek receives a call, and he later informs his men that their cover has been blown. Meanwhile, Helen receives information that the number is registered to a company called Lebendauer Enterprises. They discover that the conspiracy had been to kill 4 random people to hide one specific target. Someone needed O-Line Archer's construction business, and she wasn't willing to let it go. Helen tells Reacher that it's just a theory. Reacher assumes that whoever framed Barr knew about Baghdad, and the only person who could have given that information was Barr himself. Reacher tells her to help him find any close associates of Barr, as that would lead them closer to finding the killer. Helen argues that finding the shooter isn't her job, and even if she believes Barr is innocent, she's unwilling to take any of this to court. Reacher thanks her for the coffee and leaves. Sandy is getting ready to leave town when she comes across Charlie. He introduces himself as a friend of Jeb's and tells her she must have been pretty wasted during their previous meeting, not to remember him. Charlie tells her she looks great, and if she would mind grabbing a drink with him tonight. She tells him she's meeting some people and opts to leave when she's knocked out by another of the Zek's thugs. The next morning, Helen goes to meet Reacher, and she gives him the location of a gun range that matches his requirements. She tells him to rest as he has a long drive the next day. Reacher warns Helen that 4 random people were killed to cover up the murder of O-Line, and if he's right, just saying her name could get her killed. Reacher warns her to be careful. Emerson and the police find Sandy's body in a dumpster close to her apartment. Reacher arrives at her apartment and finds the police taking out Sandy's body in an ambulance. Emerson sights Reacher, and after staring at him for a while, he angrily begins a chase. In pursuit, Emerson calls for backup and air support. Although being considered the suspect, Reacher also chases after Charlie on a highway bridge. They get separated by a tunnel for a while, but Reacher bumps into a row of roadside water containers at the tunnel end. His engine fails to reignite for some time, but his car starts after much effort. The chase continues and Reacher keeps going after the Zek's men, but they manage to evade him when he gets blocked by the cops. Now, to save himself from the raging cop cars and helicopters, he sees an oncoming bus, and he steps out of his slowly moving car to join the passengers waiting to board the bus. They provide him with cover until the bus arrives, and Reacher successfully evades the cops. DA Roldan tells Helen a warrant has been issued for Reacher's arrest, as they have got a strong reason to believe Reacher was responsible for the death of Sandy. Helen refuses to believe the accusations that her dad and Emerson tell her about Reacher. An argument soon ensues between Helen and her dad. She tells them she has no idea where Reacher might be after he left her office that morning. Helen gets a call from Reacher, and he tells her he's being framed just like Barr, and Sandy was killed because they want him to run, but he won't. He tells her he thinks either Emerson or her dad has some affiliation with the bad guys, as he's been followed from day one, and only she and both of them knew he was in town. Reacher visits the gun range, and he meets Mr. Cash, the owner. He tells Mr. Cash he's looking for a friend who served with him in Iraq. Mr. Cash asks if his friend has a name, and he responds James Barr. Mr. Cash tells him he's never heard of anyone with that name before. Reacher then explains that he's not a cop, and he's only here because he believes Barr is innocent. Mr. Cash gives Reacher 3 bullets, and asks him to hit the target with all of them, and maybe then they can talk. Reacher takes a shot. Mr. Cash is impressed and he tells him he would answer one question. Reacher asks who his best shooter was, and he replies that Barr was his best shooter. Mr. Cash hands Reacher all of Barr's targets, and Reacher claims that Barr isn't as good, even on his best day in the army. Reacher tells him it's possible Barr had a friend who he let switch the targets on the range. Reacher asked if Barr came alone, and Mr. Cash shows him the footage of Barr and his associate coming into the gun range. Through the footage, they can see Charlie's face. Meanwhile, Helen discloses to her father all the dirt she could dig up on Lebendauer Enterprises. Roldan doesn't buy into any of it, and he tells her she's beginning to sound delusional. Helen tells him that all of this information was pulled out under her name, and if what Reacher said was true, then her life is in danger, and whatever happens to her would be on his head. Roldan assumes she's testing him, and he tells her she might find it hard to believe, but he does love her, and if she believes she's in danger, then the next thing to do would be to put her in protective custody. Helen refuses and leaves. When she gets into the elevator, Emerson also rushes to catch up with her. While there, she realizes Emerson might be the mole and tries to escape, but he tases her. Then she's kidnapped by the Zek's men. Reacher calls Helen, but Charlie picks up and tells him he has her, and if he doesn't show up in the next hour, he's going to hurt her. Reacher tells him he doesn't care about Helen, and he has his picture which he's taking to the feds. Then he hangs up. After a moment, he calls back and tells Charlie he wishes to kill him, and when Charlie tries to enforce he was going to kill Helen, Reacher hangs up again. Then he calls back again. This time he tells Charlie that he's no hero, and he's got nothing to lose, and if he does hurt Helen he would beat him to death and drink his blood. Reacher asks for their location, and tells Charlie if he as much as thinks Helen has been hurt, he would disappear, and if he's smart that should scare him. Charlie gives him the location, and they get their ambush ready for Reacher. Cash meets up with Reacher, and hands him a knife. Reacher thinks he's joking, and restates how serious the situation was. Cash tells him he's aware and that's why he showed up, but he's unwilling to let him kill someone with his gun. They both plan out their strategy to get into the base as Cash would provide him cover, but Reacher is worried if his shooting skills are still competent enough. Meanwhile inside the base, Helen asks the Zek if the money he's making is enough to justify killing all those people. The Zek tells her there is no such thing as justification, as they take what can be taken. She turns to Emerson and asks why he did it. Emerson replies that she makes it sound like he had a choice. Reacher calls again to know if Helen is okay, and she tells him that they are ready for him. She pleads with him not to put his life in danger for her. He tells her to hang on and to say she believes is coming to get her. Which she does. Reacher drives in reverse in a padded vehicle into the base while coming under heavy fire. Eventually, the vehicle gets stuck, and while Cash provides him with some cover he manages to get out. Reacher, defenseless at this point, hides behind some rocks. Soon he manages to take out one of the men shooting at him. He takes his gun and takes out the other. Charlie goes to the main room to send out more reinforcement, but the two men are easily taken out by Reacher. Charlie advises the Zek to leave, before stepping outside to search for Reacher. He steps out and discovers that every single one of his men has been taken out by Reacher. Soon he gets caught off guard and disarmed by Reacher. Reacher, desiring a fist fight instead, puts his gun down, and soon a tough battle ensues between both men. While both men show great stamina, Reacher gains the upper hand and breaks Charlie's leg. This makes him pull out a knife, and he attacks Reacher ferociously. Reacher manages to defend himself, and he knocks his opponent out. Emerson, now scared, uses Helen as a body shield, but Reacher pulls out a perfect shot, killing him. Helen is greatly relieved to see Reacher. Reacher meets the Zek for the first time. While Helen tries to contact the police, Reacher tells the Zek that he would feel right at home in prison. The Zek replies that prison in America would be a retirement home, if he goes there at all. Reacher, convinced the system would not deliver justice, points a gun to the Zek, and pulls the trigger. Helen asks him what about bringing the bad guys to justice, and Reacher explains that he just did. Reacher says his final goodbye to Helen, and Helen, not wishing to see him leave, asks how she would be able to find him if she needs him. Reacher replies that she'll do fine, and she doesn't need him anymore. Helen goes to see Barr, and Barr tells her he has no wish to fight the case. He confesses to her that he's done bad things before and got away with it. Helen promises that he would be okay, but he refuses to believe her. He tells her no one can protect him from Reacher. Then we see Reacher leaving on a bus, and the movie ends here. You're welcome to share your thoughts on this movie in the comment section below. Subscribe to my channel for more movie recaps like this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay well, thanks.